After we watched the characters grow for almost 10 years, the Harry Potter franchise wrapped up in the most unprecedented of ways. They split the final film, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, into two parts. This was done because the book was so massive, it introduced so many new elements, and there were a lot of ideas that just weren't touched upon enough in the previous installments. It was also done because Warner Brothers, with big greedy dollar signs in their eyes, decided that why make $1 billion when you can make $2 billion? At least, Warner Brothers had an excuse to do it. I think fans wanted this to stretch on just a little bit longer. After this film came out, there was such a frenzy to get every film into a two-parter. Let's do a two-part finale for The Hunger Games. Let's do a two-part finale for the Twilight series. Let's do a two-part finale for Divergent. Do you want to know where the second part of that finale went? They also were planning to do a two-parter for the Justice League in response to the fact that the Avengers Infinity War was going to also be a two-parter. But at that point in 2017, the idea of doing a two-parter became very unpopular. They weren't as successful as the Harry Potter franchise itself. In fact, the Deathly Hallows seemed to be the only two-parter that actually did it correctly on a story level and on a money-making level. Justice League Part 2 never happened. Infinity War Part 2 was rebranded as Endgame. In fact, most two-parters nowadays are just back-to-back produced sequels, which is probably better from a creative standpoint because you can actually focus on making a singular story. There's no reason to split one book into 2 or even 3 parts. Remember when Warner Brothers did that with The Hobbit? They lived long enough to see themselves become the villain. Anyway, my point with the history of two-parters is that Harry Potter did it good. I thought they had a good reason to do it, and as one of the first to actually do it, it didn't seem too greedy at the time. But in retrospect, how does Deathly Hallows Part 1 hold up? Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 1 was released in 2010, and the hype for this two-part finale was unheard of. People were flocking to the theaters, ready to see how it all ends. Even though everyone had already read the book and knew exactly how it all ends. There was something intriguing about the event, though. Previous installments, while generally praised, still cut a lot of material from the book. But with the Deathly Hallows, it was kind of impossible to cut anything out. The complexity of Harry and Voldemort's final battle and the logistics of the Horcruxes were so particular, you couldn't half-ass any of it. Luckily, the producers knew this and didn't turn this charade into a cash-grabbing pursuit, but actually took the opportunity to dig into the characters and story. For the most part, it plays out fine enough. However, I think the curse of the Part 1 of any two-parter is that it gets saddled with all the setup and all the exposition, with the hope that Part 2 will be a satisfying finale that can somehow be morphed into a normal plotline. Oftentimes, the second half manages to become a solid 3-act finale, but the first half becomes overblown with discussions and build-up. No matter what, Part 1s always get stuck with the cliffhanger, ending on an awkward note, with a lot of unanswered questions that you only hope the audience will still care about once the sequel comes out. Granted, it doesn't matter much anymore since anyone can watch these back-to-back at home, as if it's a single movie, but I'll give credit that David Yates, Steve Kloves, and everyone involved tried their best to turn Part 1 into an individual film that stands on its own. Unfortunately, there is too much exposition and way too many threads that I don't think get picked up again in the sequel. Like, remember when Dumbledore's past started to be scrutinized by the Daily Prophet? Harry was talking to that reporter at the wedding. That was a big part of the book. Harry kind of felt challenged by the notion that Dumbledore maybe wasn't as great as he remembered. Then they only brush upon it again in the sequel. It also doesn't help that Part 1 gets stuck with the camping scenes, which to me is about as boring as this franchise ever got. It at least has a few cinematic treats that you never see in Harry Potter. There's a montage of them traveling the empty landscapes as the radio lists the names of missing wizards in the background. Some very haunting stuff. There's the dancing sequence that I originally hated, but I've come to admire as one of the more charming and relaxing sequences in the series. Otherwise, it feels like a waiting game, which has some tension, but not nearly as much as I'd expect. A lot of the other parts are quite good and exhilarating. The opening broomstick battle, going to Godric's Hollow, the showdown at Malfoy Manor. Frankly, this has some of the best Harry Potter scenes, but it doesn't amount to much when compared to the other films, and in retrospect, I can't help but remember that this all leads to a much more satisfying sequel. Things start fine enough, even if they cut out the heartwarming moment between Dudley and Harry. I thought the point of two-parters was to avoid cutting out scenes like this. We get a nostalgic look at the Dursleys' empty house, where the whole story began, and a lot of side characters from the wizarding world that make quick but noteworthy appearances. We also see Bill Weasley for the first time, with a well-casted Domhnall Gleeson in the role. Where's Charlie Weasley? At this point, I assume a dragon toasted his ass. I also never materialized this before, but Domhnall Gleeson is Brendan Gleeson's son, who happens to play Mad-Eye Moody. It's neat to see them together in this. After the duels in the sky, we see the Burrow again, the rapid non-romance of Harry and Ginny, and a wedding, which allows the audience to breathe. But not as long as you'd hope. That's the odd thing about this. Every time it seems like we'll get a chance to simply watch the wizards live their life, we get interrupted by the plot. And I know, that's kind of the point of a movie, fine enough. But there's other times where there should be rising tension, but the scene is misplaced or uneventful, and it goes nowhere. Like, they go to Godric's Hollow. It's a beautiful moment. It's where Harry's family lived and died, as well as Dumbledore's family and many other great wizards. But suddenly it gets stopped by Bathilda Bagshot, this new character who's actually just Nagini the Snake in disguise, and it's all a ruse to attack Harry because I guess Voldemort knew he'd be going to visit his parents at the graveyard. This is all really weird. I know it's magic, I know this is in the book, but it's so haphazardly placed in the middle of the first half of an epic two-part saga. It's a bit pointless. To be fair, without Hogwarts in the picture, we're able to see so many new locations, like Malfoy Manor, which is exactly the kind of place I'd imagine someone named Lucius would live. There's more of the Ministry of Magic, which has the best scene in the movie, even if Polyjuice Potion, which used to be really tough to create, can now be found at any local drugstore, I assume. We see the Lovegoods home, which is very much the aesthetic of Luna. There's even a glimpse of Dumbledore's grave, which I thought had a powerful and excellent design. The designs are just top-notch, as it has been previously, but it's almost more impressive here with all the new landscapes. Plus, I have to mention the music that ties everything together. Lots of new themes that heighten the suspense and soften the melodrama. Alexandre Desplat makes for a defining Harry Potter composer. I should also correct a mistake from the last video. I said Desplat did the music for Half-Blood Prince, but it was actually done by Nicholas Hooper. I'm sorry, Nick, your score was so good. It's cool to see some of these old characters finally interact, like Snape and Voldemort, even if they're barely in it. There's also the return of Dobby, Wormtail, and Ollivander, characters I never expected to return. I know they're in the book, but they at least brought back the same actors, which can't always be pulled off after a 10-year absence, so the series has a full, rounded connectivity to the earlier films. There's some new characters, but like I've said before, you can't start introducing new people just as we're getting to the end. Like those Snatchers. That was the most redundant group of characters ever. We already had Death Eaters. Why did we need another group of evil wizards who didn't quite have what it takes to be a Death Eater? Maybe if they went into their methodology and motivation, but they don't. At least we got that weirdly timed comedy. One of the standout pieces is the history of the Deathly Hallows, which is told through an animation sequence. It breaks away from real-time narrative devices that Harry Potter has always utilized, and instead finds a cinematic way to tell this story, which still fits neatly in the style and world of these wizards. Nevertheless, while I can gush all day about the good stuff, as I can do with any Harry Potter film, I still have a tough time staying invested. The main trio keeps improving their acting chops, but it doesn't help that the romance is forced and the conflicts are rushed. Plus, the worst part of any Potter movie is Ron being pissy. He was pissy in Goblet of Fire. It was a relief to see him better in the 5th and 6th installments, but here, he's worse than ever. Like, I get why he's acting this way, but I can't stand how out of nowhere it is, even if the locket has dark magic properties. I mean, I guess it leads to the most erotic of redemptions. Damn, this really put the hard R in Potter. Speaking of the locket, it takes almost the entire movie to destroy it, which would be understandable, but they don't locate any new Horcruxes, which means most of them will need to be found in the next and final film. This is a nitpick, but I really hate when the character is chasing down items or taking down individual bad guys, and the first one is tough and is the focus of one whole story. But after that, it becomes super easy to do the rest, and they knock out like 25 items off a checklist in 90 minutes. Again, this was split into 2 parts to better develop the story, but obviously it's not done to better spread out these big moments. I can't quite remember how the book did it, but I don't think it was this fast. Look, the Deathly Hallows Part 2 is my second favorite in the franchise, so I'm probably biased against this one for not being as gratifying. But even in 2010, it was underwhelming. It has heart, it has action, but it also has a lot of pacing issues that make for an uneven yet beautiful experience. The only crime of the lesser Harry Potter movies is that they were sometimes boring. But even then, they at least developed the world, and they didn't have as many story issues, shocking story issues like the Crimes of Grindelwald. I may not like this one as much as the others, but when I watch it, it doesn't feel like an obligation. It does the job that it needs to do. I think it could have done it better, and it gets me excited for the superior sequel. Thanks to Lucas for this Patreon request. Thanks for watching the video, and special shout out to Lauren, Anthony, Anna, Kirsten, Spencer, Lucas, Ryan, and Robert for supporting me on Patreon. By joining my Patreon, you can get exclusive blogs and videos, and for just $7, you can get your own monthly movie review. I hope you stick around, cinephile, and have a happy, productive day.